the Department of Commission at accgov.com, and you can see all the agenda items there. If you have an electronic device, if you turn the volume off so that we're not distracted by any noises from that, that would be appreciated.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, is the microphone on? I don't hear you.
It says it's on air.
Oh, there it comes.
Is that me now?
That's you now.
I'm there now?
Yeah.
Do I have to say it over?
No.
I don't think so. Okay, so we're going to start off tonight with a special called session. Jean, would you please call the roll?
Here.
Here.
Link. Here. Bailey.
Present.
Neesmith.
Here.
Bell.
Here.
Harrod.
Present.
Gertz.
Here.
And Hamby.
Here.
Thank you. The purpose of this meeting is to enter into executive session for an attorney-client conference to discuss threatened or pending litigation and real estate acquisition or disposal. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. And at this time, Commissioner Dickerson has Mayor Denson's approval to make an announcement to us.
Again?
Yes, again.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Wright. Tonight I'm presenting some information, or sharing some information about an award that was won. Oops.
Never mind.
Well, never mind. I got a loud mouth. I can talk loud. On September 7th of this year, Envision Athens Vice Chair Michelle Pearson, our project manager Aaron Barger, and I traveled to Jekyll to receive the Georgia Planning Association's Outstanding Planning Process Award, along with several members of the Athens-Clarke County Planning Department. This award recognizes the 18-month Envision Athens planning process that involved a diverse cross-section of the Athens-Clarke County community. The award was made possible and is a reflection of the unprecedented collaborative efforts between a host of local agencies and citizens, including the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County's Planning Department, more than 150 stakeholders, 1,600 citizens, and 11 dedicated institutional partners, all of whom provided input and feedback on a wide range and variety of important community topics, reviewed economic data and community conditions, and worked together on the development of a community-wide action agenda. The opportunity for this community-wide public-private effort came about as a result of the state-required update to the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County's comprehensive plan, funding approval from the mayor and my fellow commissioners, and a decision by 10 local institutional partners to dedicate additional financial resources to this effort. These institutional partners included Clarke County School District, the Athens Housing Authority, the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce, the University of Georgia, the Northeast Georgia United Way, the City of Winterville, Piedmont Athens Regional, St. Mary's Hospital, Georgia Power, and Athens Technical College. With the assistance of the consulting firm Planning Next, by strategically aligning the comprehensive plan with the Envision Athens effort, we were able to establish a much broader and more inclusive approach to obtaining the necessary public input on our local community and economic development concerns than if these efforts had been completed independent of one another. Ultimately, the outcomes achieved would not have been possible without the efforts of both the Athens-Clarke County Planning Department staff and the 38-member Envision Athens Steering Committee guiding the process. If you are a member of the Steering Committee or the Planning Department, I please ask that you stand to be recognized. I know we have a few in the audience. Tonight, I'd like to ask actually all of y'all to come forward, but we would like to personally recognize someone who played an integral role in the planning process and who without this award would not be possible. Athens-Clarke County Planner Gavin Hassemer. If he'll come forward along with Brad Griffin and our Aaron Barger and our new, actually at the time, Deborah Lonan was a citizen on our committee. She's now head of Housing and Community Development. Under the astute guidance and leadership of Athens-Clarke County Planning Director Brad Griffin, Gavin headed up the development of the comprehensive plan and worked side by side with the Planning Next and the 38-member Envision Athens Steering Committee to manage the public input process. As a result of Gavin's leadership, the Athens-Clarke County community has both a comprehensive plan and an action agenda. These living, breathing documents establish our community's common vision and identify strategic actions that will guide our community forward together. We would like Gavin and Brad to keep this on display at the planning department so it will remind you of all of your hard work and what we've accomplished. A couple of additional notes. To ensure that the action agenda is implemented and doesn't just sit on a shelf, in April of this year, a 23-member implementation oversight committee was established. The IOC is made up of both citizens and institutional partners. One of our IOC members is, well, actually, I guess you're not a member anymore because she's a citizen. I thought I was going to have another member with me tonight, so I apologize. The committee's charge is to oversee and guide the implementation of the action agenda to ensure its success. In May, the IOC hired Aaron Barger as our project manager. Aaron's job includes convening those in our community who have been identified as the lead agencies or organizations that will carry out the specific work identified in the action agenda to help facilitate their work and engage and inform the public of the progress being made on that front. On September 6th, just a couple weeks ago, the IOC approved the short-term work plan that identifies the top priority action item in each of the 14 topic areas of the plan, the lead agencies for each action, and the measures of success that will indicate when the action has been achieved. We encourage you to visit envisionathens.com to access and review the short-term work plan and learn more about this community-wide action agenda and how you may participate. Thank you. Can we get a picture? Hide that real quick. Thank you. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you.
Thank you, lady. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, lady. Appreciate it. Yep. Thanks, Jean. Thank you, Mayor.
Well
Pro Tem.
done. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Dickerson, and everyone who worked with that process, and congratulations on the award. That's outstanding. We will now proceed with the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County's agenda-setting session. This is the agenda for our October 2nd voting meeting. We will have citizens' input at two different points in it. At this point, we'll have citizens' input for the consent agenda, which is items 1 through 11. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address, and you will have 3 minutes to address us on your topic that is one of those 11. And when the light turns yellow, that means you have 30 seconds left. Is there anybody who wants to speak to us about the consent agenda? Okay. Does anybody need anything taken off the consent agenda? Commissioner Harrod?
Number 3, I have a question.
Oh, there's a left side, yes. Commissioner Lake.
Number 11, please.
And then Parker?
Number 2, 5, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, Commissioner Dickerson?
1 and 6.
Okay, 1, 6, 5,
Consent agendas together.
2. And who was 11? Melissa?
Yes.
Okay. So now I move all those down, right? And we're going to start talking about those, get those questions answered. I think I saw Commissioner Harrod first. That's item number 3.
Do them in order. Number 1.
Oh, okay, thank you. In order then, the first item, Commissioner Dickerson?
Right. So I had a question for the manager this afternoon. Just kind of curious. Obviously, the state has been collecting the 2.5% insurance premium and remitting it to us. But apparently, I guess I would need clarification. The law allows us to impose up to a 2.5% insurance premium. And I'm just kind of curious, we wouldn't want to evaluate that before we just assume. I mean, they've been taking it and doing it, thinking that we were accepting it. Of course, that is $7.7 million, so we may not want to reduce it, but I'm just kind of curious if it's just automatic that we're supposed to just say, well, it's 2.5, that's what it is, or if the law does give us the ability to evaluate, to say maybe it's 1.5% or 2%. I say that because I've had a lot of citizens recently complaining about their insurance rates.
Okay. I will check into that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. On to item number 2. And did you want to keep that off the consent until you got the information?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Parker, you had number 2?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, what can Public Safety Initiatives Capital be used for? What kinds of projects specifically? Does it have to be the sheriff and the PD, or could it be other initiatives aimed at improving public safety?
This is a capital line item that's associated with the sheriff's office.
Okay. And I'd like to see some more details about what a standard police package utility vehicle is, what that means specifically. I know that several of my fellow commissioners and I were just at a event over the weekend talking about getting Athens to 100% renewable energy, and so I'd love to look into alternatives for these vehicle purchases that might be more environmentally sustainable.
Well, and we're with you there, and I can give you some more information. Unfortunately, we have looked at several different types of models, so I'll share with you what we've looked at.
Okay. And then I just want to see what exactly this vehicle would come with, because if it's just being used for medical transport and things like that, I'm wondering what sorts of things it could become equipped with, or if they're necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dickerson, you had a question for number 2?
Yeah, I had a couple too. So item number 8 talks about transports to the hospital, the emergency room specifically. And I'm curious about several things, so go on the record. I'm interested in how many inmates are currently housed in the jail, why there's a trend in the increase of ER visits. I believe it says it's trended from 60 to 100 per year over the last 5 years. I'd be interested in why we're using the ER and maybe not being able to handle these with our own in-house medical staff, and maybe what the common ailment is. I guess it's sending them to the ER. Thank you.
Okay. Does that cover the questions for number 2? All right, we'll go to item number 3. Commissioner Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So this is an item relating to Athens Transit, and it talks in the agenda item, Mr. Manager, about money for, if I can just find it, construction of up to 3 new remote transfer facilities. Do we know where they're going to be, or has that not yet been decided?
Well, I think that's it's not yet decided. It is talked about in the transit development plan, but it's not yet decided.
Okay. Do you have a rough idea of where? Or do I have to go and read the transit development plan, all 500 pages of it?
Yeah, I will direct you to it.
Okay, thank you. We can put that back on.
Let's get Commissioner Dickerson's question out there.
I was just going to mention that I had actually asked Director Butch McDuffie about it, and one of them I know was leaning towards somewhere around the loop, maybe the car ride, what do you call it, the car rider?
Park and ride.
Park and ride thing, somewhere in that general vicinity, or east, so.
Right, and as I understand it, it's allowing us to get further out more frequently as far as the looping. Instead of this, it's this, right?
No, I mean, it's a good idea.
Wax on,
I did
wax
it.
off.
Instead of this, it's this, something like that, or maybe 3. Oh, I can't do 3. Okay. So can that go back on consent, and we'll get those details? Okay. 2 is still on discussion?
Yes.
Right. 3 is back on consent. Commissioner Parker, I think number 5?
Yes. So I was researching this grant, and from what I found online, the application deadline was August 18th, and so I just wanted to get some clarification on where we're at in this process of requesting permission to submit the grant.
All right, and sometimes in the way that the notices come out, an application can be submitted and then come into y'all after the fact, but I'll find out exactly where it is.
Okay.
Do you want to keep that on consent?
I would like to take that off just to
Okay.
further
All right.
discussion next week.
I didn't write down who wanted number 6 off.
Me.
Commissioner Dickerson?
Yes. And I shared some of these with the manager earlier, but just so everybody knows and we're all on the same page. Obviously, this is a first-come funds available basis. And what I guess my question was, it looks like we are allowed at a minimum to give 15% of home funds to a CHODO. In this case, we're giving almost half the money, and that's not necessarily a problem. But I am kind of curious that if you add up the million at the top in revenues, the bottom's actually short about 100,000. I think that available for future home funding should be like 487.44. So I'm just kind of curious, does that mean that we have roughly $100,000 or $100,500 available for other projects? So just clarification on that.
And that was from our work session, the same as number 7, I believe, last week. Okay, do you want to leave that on consent, or do you wait?
As long as we get I just want to make sure that the numbers are right and that if there's still money available, we let people know that, because otherwise, they may not submit applications. I mean, and I know that a percentage of that money would have to go for administration and planning, because that's how they
Right.
do the formula. But it'd be nice to know, I think, for the public to know how much was available. So I'm good with consent as long as I get an answer.
Yeah, so I think that typically comes out, but we'll also have time to take it back off the consent at October 2nd, as far as needed. And then, I think it's Commissioner Link, number 11?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from the committee members who discussed this, if there was much discussion of the discontinuance of use 12-month period, that's under Section 4B, because I know that the health and safety study from which these recommendations kind of came, recommended that period to be much shorter than the 12 months that we're actually putting into action here. And I'm wondering if y'all on that committee had any.
We did discuss it, and we decided 12 months is reasonable in terms of how long it takes for a business to get up and running after it's changed hands.
Yeah.
And also, it is in the historic district, too, isn't it, downtown?
Yeah.
Some
Not all
parameters
of
with
it.
that.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe the assistant manager can fill me in on the reasoning behind that initial period, which I think was 45 days. Like, that's a pretty wide gap. And I think that one of the intentions of this recommendation was to prevent some of those businesses that are closing down just for the summer, and to encourage them to either stay open and maintain that activity downtown, or to open up and to encourage a new business to take place. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear more about the study's reasonings behind that initial recommendation.
And this one was on the agenda, Chairman Neesmith, wasn't this one
Yeah,
on the
just-
agenda last month? But yet you needed some clarification, so we had Brad come and re-explain it. And the attorney might be able to give us some feedback on I thought the 12 months was in it both last time it was on the
It was.
agenda.
It was, and as I said, we discussed it, and we decided that that was a reasonable amount of time to allow for, if a change of ownership occurs, for the place to be remodeled and so forth before they apply for their license.
Does that capture, as well as change of
45 days
use?
is just too short.
Do we have any means of keeping track of businesses that do close down for several months at a time before that 12-month period? Do we have a list of a trend of that happening at all?
I don't think,
I mean,
To my knowledge,
in
we
the
do not,
study,
but let
did-
me go back and talk to the planning staff to find
Yeah,
out if
I'm just
there's
interested to
means
know what
do
the
so.
trends are and, if this ordinance is going to actually achieve the ends that we want it to achieve.
so you concerned about one of the bars being
Well, I'm
closed
just
for 3
concerned
months?
about
Because
the
I think that's a
idea
good
that
idea.
we seem to have a trend of, a few places shutting down for the entire summer, and, I don't think that's a very healthy downtown environment, and, if we could perhaps encourage a more diverse business environment downtown, then, maybe if we tightened up this ordinance, it would encourage them to stay open.
I would say, Commissioner Link, that this does encourage a more diverse business environment downtown. So we don't have so many bars open all summer. And these people are running a business.
Yeah.
And if they can't get enough business to pay their employees and so forth during the summer, then it's their right to close for a little while. We can't control that.
Yeah.
I'd like to know some of the trends, if y'all have any of that data.
We'll see if there's some of that, and then we'll keep that off the consent.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go down to new business. That's items 12 through 22, see if we can't get some things back on the consent agenda down there. This is time for citizen input, items 12 through 22. If anybody would like to speak.
I'm fairly new
Okay.
to this honor. Don't have to be.
Just state your name and your address, and you'll have
Okay.
3 minutes. She'll turn the light on, and when it turns yellow, you have 30 more seconds.
Okay, it's John Johnson, 100 Snapfinger Drive. I'm here concerning what they're doing at Barnett Shoals. There is where they're putting that bike lane, where they're taking a whole lane of traffic for a bike lane. And I go through there to Kroger and then other places in town multiple times a day. And just the other day, school let out was past the Lexington, Barnett Shoals, old Lexington, Barnett Shoals was past that. You've taken away that free flow and that yield, and you've just made it a nightmare. Second, I do some landscaping in one of the Nick Clarkdale, I believe it is. I can't get in there with my truck, and I just got a short trailer pulling my lawnmower. You can't get in there. The poor people that live along that, let alone get in and out, they're going to drive over double yellow line and get nailed for it. I mean, the thing, I came here, I left my house, it took me a half hour to get here. I pulled into the Shell gas station to grab something, and it took me 8 minutes to get out in traffic, and that was with somebody stopping to let me in. That has just created a nightmare. You're going to have accidents. And the other thing I wanted to say is I go by that every day. I went by it the first day it was up. Tonight, I saw my first bicycle. I think this is terrible. Bicycles don't pay road taxes. They obviously don't have to enforce traffic laws. I mean, I had one drive through a red light the other day right in front of me. I mean, you can't, that's congested enough. You can't add these bicycle paths to the roads and take a lane for it on an already congested road. I mean, that's ludicrous. Plus all the money the state or the city paid to redo that intersection of Lexington Road, Old Lexington Road and Barnett Shoals, all the money, that thing was just being finished when I moved here. You just threw that away. That's all just wasted now by clogging up the next intersection. So,
Thank you for coming to share your concerns with us. Is there anybody else? Items 12 through 22.
I want to talk about the private street acquisition.
Can you share us your
Yes,
name?
ma'am. My name's Sam Massey,
Thank you.
and I own a house on Laurel Springs. There's 3 streets in our neighborhood that are part of this acquisition. Number 1 is a Huntington Road that runs beside the mall, but it's just the last 100 yards of Huntington Road. There's 4 houses. Then you got Laurel Springs where my house is, and then you have Mountain Laurel. You know, I've owned a house there since 2009. These streets have not been maintained ever since I've been there. I bought my house in '09. Everything was fine. In 2011, we received a letter from Mickey Dillard, and what she stated in this letter was that she was dissolving the company that owned the streets, and she was no longer going to pay taxes on these streets. And she was now letting us know this was now our problem. And so, you know, we don't have a homeowners association. We never have. And it's 30 houses. And so at that point, no one did anything. We swept it under the rug. It's not our problem. Why should I have to pay the tax bills for a street I don't own? So it went, you know, dormant for 2 years, and I tried to sell my house in 2012. My wife and I had a baby, had another on the way, and we'd outgrown our house. And at that point, put on the market, sold in 5 days, full asking price, woohoo, everything's great. They could not get lending, and it had nothing to do with their credit. They couldn't get lending because the streets were owned by a dissolved company, and they were now 2 years delinquent on their taxes. So you cannot get a loan, nor can people refi. You got people paying 8 and 9% interest on their houses because they can't refi in this, you know, low interest environment. So after that, for the next 3 years, then tried to create a homeowners association. Went door to door. Let's put $50 in the pot. Everybody do it. Thank God we didn't do that, because to fix the streets it'd be $190,000. No way $50 a month was going to cover that. But I only got about 25% interest. Then I met with attorneys and brought in lenders and because I was trying to come up with a solution to sell my house. So we came up with a road maintenance agreement, which said nobody had to put any money in the pot. We would elect one person, one member board from each street. And, if something had to be fixed, the board would vote on it. Boom, we'd pay the equal share. I only got about 40% interest there. So now I'm the guy that everybody, if I'm walking my dog in the neighborhood, everybody's hiding, behind their house. But the third thing we did, I got with Jerry and we got with the city and we came up with a deal. The city would take over ownership, the city would put up money for the labor, but the neighborhood had to come up with the money for the material. So you're talking, $80,000 out of our pocket. Sorry, I'm gonna run out of time. Again, for a problem that's not ours. Me and Jerry got almost run out of the neighborhood. I mean, somebody threatened to sue Jerry and call the cops on him. But again, that didn't work because it's not the neighborhood's fault. It's not our fault, and we're being asked to pay for this. And still, you cannot buy a house in this neighborhood without cash. So everybody's selling their houses for cash for a lower price value, bring it down the neighborhood, or they have to rent it. Those are the only two solutions in the house. And the streets are falling apart. And so all I ask is that, there was money set aside in T-Splosh to help out streets. And all I'm asking is this money be used for that purpose and to help our streets. So, thank you.
Thank you for sharing those details. Does anybody else want to speak to us about items 12 through 22? Okay, we'll come behind the rail. Anybody have any questions or need any clarification on number 12? Commissioner Dickerson?
Thanks. So I called the manager this afternoon because I'm trying to understand the intersection ranking matrix that was included in our packet. I guess I just want to understand how something gets a safety score of 40, how something gets a current volume capacity score of 7.5 versus 0. Just want to try to understand, surely there's got to be some sliding scale or some, if that could be shared with us, that'd be helpful. The other thing I guess I want to say is that I hope, and this is going to come true when we talk about the bike ped master plan, is that I hope that we are somehow going to align these projects with resurfacing projects or other projects that are going on, so that we're not, working in one area and a year later we return to that same area to do something else. We need to try to figure out how to make this all, work together. And it may mean that when the mayor and commission get these intersections to come forward, that they look at what else is going on in the area and try to combine those efforts so that we're good stewards of the limited resources that we do have, because we may be able to leverage some of that mobilization at the same time. Those are my only comments.
Okay. All right, anybody else need clarification on that?
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Mayor Pro Tem. Blaine, it's mentioned that the first two projects are, upon approval, going to go into design phase. Does staff have an idea when those designs would come back to us?
It's probably going to be several months.
Okay.
I'd say, 4 months on the outset. I'll refine that for you, though.
Okay.
We want to put that on consent or not?
That's fine.
I'd like to get an understanding of how they came up with that matrix.
I'm just going to ask.
Okay. I think it might be, if I might also, because there are two projects listed here, and, we only have, I don't know how many lists we've all gotten this week on bike and
Yeah.
bed. If there's a way that staff could determine whether or not there's any other projects, maybe in the Oglethorpe Avenue, State Route 10 loop at Chase Street, or anything else going on in that area that we can maybe combine the effort, so that we can get a better bang for our buck out of that. That would be helpful. And I guess, let me just go one step further, or if there are other projects we know coming forward on items C through J, where it might make sense to reconsider the order, just so we have our full information in front of us.
Okay,
Thanks.
all right. Item number 13, Commissioner Hamby?
Oh, yes, thank you. Just a thought or a question, too. So we have this money going towards hybrid vehicles and money going toward some building retrofits, I guess. That's what I'll call it. We haven't identified the buildings yet. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if we're talking about a potential SPLOST 2020 program that looks at maybe building a whole new building for
Sure.
a lot of our current buildings, one big building, would it not be prudent or feasible to either move sub-project 3 into sub-project 4 and purchase more hybrid vehicles, or hold off on spending the $100,000 until we decide which direction we're heading in? I say that because, and I know your comment may be, well, that'll be a ways away, and that's true, it will be. Well, hopefully not too far in the future. But according to the facts and issues that I did read, it'll be implemented over 1 to 2 years, but then we see a return 2 to 4 years after that. So, and then if you look at what we would be saving on the vehicles, it's for every 3,000 miles, I thought I saw in here, maybe it was 120. Anyway, you save $8,000 per vehicle or something like that. So if you buy more vehicles, you're saving just as much money as you would retrofitting a building. So
Well, Andrew-
you see where I'm going with this?
I do.
Okay.
But Andrew has done the calculations, and the savings from the replacement will pay for themselves faster than we would actually build the new building.
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, but could you identify buildings that may not be a part? I mean, like maybe the police department or something like that. I mean, I don't mind spending it on the buildings, but if, say, for example, if we're looking at a new planning department building, it kind of would make sense to do it, and then somebody comes along and tears
Sure.
it down or something. Not saying that would happen, but
Well, and I'll tell you this too, I did send an email explaining the situation, and there was a staff misunderstanding about these sustainability projects, and some LEDs have already been replaced.
right.
In fact, these above
Yeah, well,
us.
we're not going to tear City Hall down.
Right,
so-
right, right.
So that,
But I can identify the buildings, now, that work has been halted, but I can identify the buildings where they have been put in.
I think that'd be helpful, just for
Okay.
us. I mean, well, not where it's been put in, where you want to put them in. That's
Okay.
that's where I'm looking at. If they're already in, there's nothing you can do about it, but,
Right. Because we're already saving
right.
on those. Okay. Commissioner Dickerson?
Thank you. So I had just a general question. Obviously, it appears that we're looking at sedans and maybe not utility vehicles that are within our fleet. I'm just kind of curious if we wouldn't want to look at, if there wasn't, or I'm interested in whether or not staff looked at that, because obviously they guzzle more gas, they emit more emissions. Whether or not that's something we've looked at, we might get a bigger bang for our buck with a utility vehicle than a sedan that may sit still half the day. Versus trucks that are running throughout our community. So just curious, and there may just not be enough money to do it because those vehicles are really expensive, but just kind of curious if that was something that was looked at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We move on to item number 14. This one is the approval of preliminary construction plans for the water reclamation facilities, phosphorus and solid waste handling improvements. This was our work session last week. Very thorough presentation. Commissioner Dickerson?
Sorry. So I do appreciate, and this is really what's exciting about doing these plans, is that, we have the service delivery plan essentially has laid all this out for us, and now we're at the point where we need to move forward with these. But I do have a few questions, and I've shared a few of these with the manager this afternoon. We were both pushed for time. So I guess I'm trying to understand. Apparently, the North Oconee Water Reclamation Facility, we're looking at a mechanical drying system that would be about $7 million built in the next 3 years. And then we're looking at solar drying and anaerobic digester, along with clarifiers in futures, maybe 3 to 5 years, somewhere in the Cedar Creek. And also the anaerobic digester would be at the North Oconee. But I'm just kind of curious, I think it said, and I apologize, my notes are kind of messy, but that we would have to have clarifiers in order to let me find that note real quick. This is a huge document. Let's see. Solids. If somebody finds it before I do, please yell. So, and I don't see it right off, but I remember what we talked about was that you had to have clarifiers in place in order to have. Yeah, here it is, item 23. So for anaerobic digestion to work, you have to have either primary or secondary clarifiers, and none of our water reclamation facilities have those. So my question was just sort of in the timing of it all, what the, see if I make sense of this. Because we're talking about dryers at North Oconee, Cedar Creek, and Middle Oconee, right? Middle Oconee has dryer too? So, and I'm not sure this makes sense now that I'm thinking about it, but cost of what is the cost of does the cost of clarifiers offset the benefits of the digester that funds the dryer and decreases the volume of the biosolids? I just want to sort of make sure that it makes sense, because I think at some point in this, we talked about, I think the staff said that we might actually consider hauling biosolids from North Oconee, from Middle Oconee and Cedar Creek to the North Oconee plant. So I'm sitting here thinking, why would we, if that's the case, would we want to invest $7 million in a biosolids dryer if the plan is to ultimately dry them at another facility? If you know what I mean? I mean, so it's sort of a timing issue. The other question I had was, and I did mention this to the manager this afternoon, is the biosolids are going to be converted in the anaerobic digester, but there's usually some residual, or I think technically they call it digestate. There's something left, and I'm just kind of curious, I assume that's going to go to the composting project at the landfill, but I'm just kind of curious. It wasn't really made clear if that would be what happened. But I think the main thing is does it make sense? I think I'm getting to my point. Does it make sense to build a drying system now at North Oconee if the plan is ultimately to have an anaerobic digester and sorting all that at North Oconee? So build one now, wait for $7 million, and then build a digester where you may not even need that. This is very confusing, but I think I'll take another stab at it in an email to him, but just had a lot of questions.
Well, if their answer doesn't hit it, type it out to them in an email, and we'll get this nailed down. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, that's number 14. Does anybody else need any? Okay.
I was just waiting for Commissioner Hamby to say something about septic tanks.
No, I have nothing, no comment.
Nope, we're moving right on to 15. This is going to be coming from the Government Operations Committee on the Private Streets Acquisition Program. Commissioner Harrod, the chair, would you please share what you'd like on that?
Sure. So this was assigned by the mayor to our committee late last year. And initially, we took a stab at this, and we tried to craft a policy that would address the issue of these private streets, regardless of the source of funding, whether it were T-SPLOST money or whether it were non-T-SPLOST money. And so that's what we presented, I guess, earlier in the summer. And then after some discussion then, it became obvious that that was perhaps not the way that people necessarily wanted to go. So we took another look at it, and we basically crafted two policies, or well, one policy but with two parts to it. One that applies with regards to T-SPLOST money, and one that would work a little bit differently for non-T-SPLOST money. So that's what we have in front of us.
Okay. And also clarifies who can bring that forward.
Yes.
As well. Commissioner Neesmith?
Thank you, committee, GOC committee. Did an excellent job. There are a couple of questions that I talked with Drew and Andy about last night that I'm going to ask the manager to tell me whether or not we need to clarify that in this policy. And that is the funding. It says if the funding, T-SPLOST 2018 funding is adequate and available. The question becomes, what is being paid for by T-SPLOST? For example, in the past, when we've had these situations, when I tried to work it out for the folks in that neighborhood, Laurel Springs, the agreement that we tried to get accepted by 65% of the neighbors was that they would pay for the materials, which was $80,000, by the way. and that the county would pay for the labor and equipment. So now we're talking about T-SPOS funding, but we're not specific about what the funding will pay for. So if it was as it was before, then the T-SPOS funding probably should pay for the materials, and then the rest would come out of operations, just like it was before. Drew indicated that that was acceptable, except if we would also say that any contract work had to be paid for by T-SPOS, which sounds reasonable because we don't have all the equipment it requires, that we require to pave a street. So, Manager, I'm going to ask you to give me some feedback pretty soon, so if I need to know if I need to clarify this language, or if you and Drew can make this fair to the neighborhood, or actually not fair to the neighborhood, fair to the T-SPOS funding, because we want the T-SPOS funding to go, if possible, to go beyond one project. As it is, I don't even know if $400,000, which is the total T-SPOS for this project, would be enough if T-SPOS had to pay for everything. So that's the question.
I understand.
Okay, thank you. The other part of it is this does spell out what happens when there isn't T-SPOS money, and it's back to the old policy. And I just would like for you to look at that and make sure that's got enough meat on the bones to be clear, because this seems to be a little less information than what the policy that we were acting under was, which I assume now it was an unwritten policy when we were trying to put the Laurel Springs Agreement, together.
No, there is a written policy that
Well,
governs that.
then this must conflict with that, or it's duplicate, one or the other.
Well, it
'cause
is
that's what
different.
this is.
It's definitely different.
Because this is if it's not T-SPOS, then if it's not T-SPOS, it doesn't need to be here.
That's right.
So we may need to strike that and use the old policy,
Okay.
or amend the old policy. I don't think we need to, though. Okay? Thank you.
Commissioner
Well,
Harris?
just to follow up, I think what we were trying to do is to get all of this under one place in the code. And so the non-T-SPOS part of this is basically what we do presently. And the T-SPOS is a little bit different, but rather than having it in two different places in the code, we were just trying to get it all into one policy.
Which makes,
Yes.
that makes sense.
So, Andy, the question becomes is this in conflict with the current policy? Should we roll the whole current policy into here, or should we eliminate this in here? I mean, I'm with you. I think perhaps it should be one policy, although, yeah, it would be Private Streets Acquisition Program, so the title's right. But let's make sure that the old policy is represented in whole here.
I mean, I would be happy to be corrected by Drew or the manager,
Yeah.
but my understanding is basically what we've done is we've simply
Okay.
tacked on a new bit related to T-SPOS to the current policy, but we've done it all in one place rather than having it in two different places in the code.
But it doesn't address everything the old policy did, like the fact that materials were paid for by the neighborhood. Oh, it does.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it does. Okay. Well, take a look at it, Blaine. If it's good, it's good.
Sure.
Everybody take a look at it. Okay?
We can put on consent.
Did you say we can put it out on consent?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, did we hear that?
Mayor?
Correct?
Okay.
Yeah,
I actually, I had a question.
Okay.
If I could real quick. So we, in item 2 on the policy, item 2.3, where it's highlighted, and it says, an exception when it can be clearly demonstrated that roadways were initially intended to be public roadways. Are we going to enumerate what those criteria are? For instance, I have a road in my district that has a speed limit sign on, has a stop sign. It clearly was intended, the attorney's been looking into it, clearly intended to be handed off as a public road, but the final check mark never happened between the developer and whatnot. So, I mean, I think we should be specific on what those criteria are in order to, so it's not arbitrary, that it's some, that there is some specific criteria that we look at. So I'd be interested in finding out what that would be. I think, seems like I recall, and perhaps Attorney Berryman can speak to this, is that some of these roads were listed in the radar permit, and that may be one of those, if indeed it is, then to me, that would be a public road. I mean, you would infer, if it's in the radar permit, that we've accepted it as a public road, right? I mean, I guess I look to the attorney to answer that question, if that's a criteria that we would, look to.
Sometimes when you try to refine criteria, you can refine so much that you exclude things. My recommendation would be there's a finite number of streets here on this list. And from our review, I think the street you're talking about would definitely be one of the ones that would meet that criteria. I don't know how much more specific we can be without going on the other side and excluding things.
Well, I mean, did I miss it in the thing? Is there something specific that says what a road is, how it's considered, or is it just the fact that it is? Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, for example,
It's on the list.
Public Works has a folder for these various streets. And they've got a checklist of things, or they've got a series of documents in there, and they've got 4 or 5 documents, and 6 are needed, or 4 or 5 check marks, and check mark number 6 didn't get done. I think that's pretty clear intent.
Okay.
When you look at their filing system and the way they've kept records on those streets, I think that's how you could come to that conclusion.
Okay. All right.
Commissioner Neesmith, did you have?
Yes, there's one other thing to consider is whose intent? Was it the intent of the county that those streets were going to be turned over? Was it the intent of the developer that he was going to turn them over? We don't know what the developer's intent was. He may have been playing games. He may have been building them up to a point that were to our specs and decided, oh, I want to do something different, so I'm not going to build that street to the spec, but I won't tell anybody. And then when it comes time, I just won't turn them over, and nobody's going to know. That's what happens. That's what's happened. Even the county was apparently doing maintenance on Laurel Springs because they didn't know.
Okay, has everybody gotten the clarification they need? Can we go back to the consent agenda on this? Yes?
I
What do
would
you think?
rather not see
Okay.
it on the consent agenda.
Okay.
I don't have anything against this, but it just seems like something that needs to be left on the regular agenda.
That's all I need to know. Okay. All right, we're back to Chairman Harrod for the Government Operations Committee, reviewing the Athens-Clarke County booting policy, make sure you say the word correctly, on private property.
Yes, thank you. So this and the next item, number 17, kind of were discussed somewhat in tandem, although they are separate items. But this one relates, as you mentioned, to the issue of using boots on vehicles and private property. And there have been some issues. This first came to my attention back in 2017, I think it was, when we had the downtown fireworks, and there were some out-of-town booting companies that came all the way from Atlanta to boot several people, and there was a feeling that they really didn't have much. You have to pay the boot to get your vehicle back, and that there was a sense that there was some perhaps predatory type activity taking place. So basically what this does is it says that, assuming that it's voted on by the Mayor and Commission, that we will not allow booting on private property here in Clarke County. Now, you can still get your car towed,
Right.
but that's a little bit more of an involved process, and it gives a little bit more, due process is not quite the right word I'm looking for, but I can't think of another one. But
Legitimate, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, it stops somebody being out there and literally 1 minute past the parking thing, they come in and boot you, which just seems to be more about revenue generation than it seems to be about enforcing access to property. So this is where it comes from.
Okay. Commissioner Bailey?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Commissioner Harrod, if you don't mind me asking, because I'm not on your committee, what do you see as the biggest difference between booting and towing? I heard you say that you thought maybe one gave more more, well, do you mind just giving a little more in-depth about the reasoning of the committee on that?
I think that the reasoning, the belief was that calling to have a vehicle towed was a bit more of an involved process, and that it might cut down on some of the, as I say, for want of a better word, predatory type activities that some of the booting companies, particularly out-of-town booting companies that just come because you pay the booting company, you don't pay the private property owner. And there was just a feeling that because somebody could literally be sitting in the parking lot waiting for you either to be 1 minute past the parking date, or, as we've had some instances on some other pieces of property in town, that maybe there was some confusion as to which private business in a communal private parking lot people were at, that requiring the property owner to go through the process of calling a towing company to come and have a tow truck come out and tow the vehicle was a little bit more involved and might be used a little bit less, with a little bit less of a kind of trigger finger reaction.
If you don't mind me just commenting, I hear that and I understand, but at the same time, we use booting. And if it's done properly, it's a reasonable way to do it. Having your car towed off to a lot where you don't know where it is, and it may even get damaged in the towing, could be a lot worse than coming and finding your car with a boot on it. At least you know where it is, and hopefully it's undamaged. I don't really have anything against your committee's proposal, but I just was still a little curious about the difference between one and the other. But thank you.
Bill, could you clarify some of that? You helped me with some of this, trying to understand what has regulation to it, like the towing versus some of the booting.
Towing is regulated by state law, and it requires that a certain size sign with certain information be on it. Credit cards can be accepted, various things like that. So there's a pretty good level of regulation through the state. The issue with the private booting, other communities in Georgia have found, is just they're really unregulated. Sometimes people put a boot on a car, and it'll be a long time before somebody comes to pick it up. Sometimes there's no signage requirement. People can be caught unawares that they're parking somewhere that could result in a boot. I think those are some of the problems that other communities have been experiencing. And when we drafted this ordinance, we actually used a couple of ordinances that other communities in the state have used. So that's a general comparison.
Thank you.
And then, as in Commissioner Harrod had touched on, 17 being sort of with this, being when the unified government is booting, we do have policies and set standards with it and notification as well. But do you want to go ahead and capture that?
Sure.
Oh, wait a minute.
Well, without cutting off debate on this, discussion on this one, the next one really applies to booting on public property, which is different.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
That's what I wanted to see
Okay.
discussed.
Okay, so number 16 is for the private property. We got that clear? All questions answered with that. Okay, now moving on to 17. Chairman Harrod.
So as I mentioned a moment ago, these two kind of came out of the same general discussion. This second one relates to clarifying our procedures and changing our procedures slightly with regards to booting on public property, largely for cars that are have outstanding unpaid parking tickets.
Okay. Commissioner Link, did you need
I
some
think it's important
clarification?
to note the difference between the private lot and the public lot. Athens-Clarke County does boot and will continue to boot, but it's only after a very extended process when someone's racked up, what is it, $200 worth of fines, and they get or 6 tickets. They can show up in court to defend themselves. I mean, there's a there's an extended process. If you get a boot, you know it's been coming for a long time. It's not this kind of waiting to jump on you kind of predatory thing that seems to be going on in the private lots.
Commissioner Hamby?
Thank you. Those are some good points, but I wanted to ask about, I know how the Downtown Development Authority handles it or is going to be handling it with unpaid tickets. I'm always wondering though, and this came up a little bit in our discussion at the government ops about, now the Downtown Development Authority, we don't write tickets for if you're parked if you're parked in a street that has a residential program, or if you're parked outside of the downtown boundaries in a handicap spot, or on a yellow curb. So I guess I know the police department writes those tickets. So I'm just wondering, what's the follow-up with the police department in making sure those tickets get paid? You see what I'm saying? I mean, I know downtown, if you got a big limit, you're going to get a boot. But if you continuously park on a yellow curb over on Hampton or...
Yeah. Well, I could tell you when I got a ticket for not having my residential tag out, it was $50, and it talked about be in court or pay by the state, and it sort of explained the next steps, which...
What's a ticket similar to what you would get for downtown, but I think it is. But I guess I'm just wondering who follows up to make sure that ticket gets paid? And,
Gotcha.
And what would be the amount of outstanding tickets beyond the downtown? I know how much is outstanding for downtown, but I'm real curious about the dollar amount of outstanding tickets for outside of downtown.
Okay.
Is that, am I making any sense?
Bill,
The dollar amount's the same. It's 6 tickets for $200 in the downtown area or out.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the total dollar amount. How much in outstanding tickets are out there that still need to be collected?
Okay. Gotcha. Good question. Anybody else? All right, we're good on 17, clarified? Okay. Keep that on discussion, or can 16, 17 go on consent?
I'd like to keep the one on, the
17?
one I asked questions about on discussion. I mean, just so, see what we
Okay, how
can
about
do.
16? Can we move that one over to consent? Is everybody good with that?
I'm happy with it, but I don't know what
16?
Commissioner Bailey is.
Oh, that's all right. No, right, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bailey, I remember you said to leave
No,
it.
I'm fine with it. I mean, I absolutely understood what the committee's thought process was after Commissioner Harrod explained it. I still wonder about the thing is that what we're talking about is the behaviors of some people who are in unregulated business versus actions in a regulated business.
Right.
And maybe the solution is that the other business needs to be regulated, but I'm fine with it going on to consent.
I mean, I'm not trying to push it.
No, you're not
too much.
pushing me.
Okay.
I don't want to go over the nuances of it. I think the committee did a lot of discussion and research and came up with what they feel is a pretty reasonable solution.
And obviously, between now and October 2nd, feedback that we may get, we can pull it back off as well. Commissioner Harrod?
Well, we actually did start off talking about trying to write some regulations, and it just became very, very difficult very, very quickly, both in terms of staff time and this, that, and the other. And so, given that the towing companies are currently regulated by the state and private booting companies basically are not, trying to create a whole set of local regulations that would have some teeth in them was too much in terms of the amount of time that it would take for our staff to be able to enforce them and this, that, and the other. And so I think if there were state regulations, and I know that the state legislature has looked at private booting on private property, but they haven't acted yet. Maybe if state regulations are imposed at some point or developed at some point in the future, maybe we could take another look at this. But from a practical point of view, trying to address a problem that was an immediate problem, we decided we couldn't wait on the state.
Right. And do you think that would be worth us putting on our discussion list for our state legislators? Just
Personally, no, because I
Okay.
don't think they're going to do anything.
Yeah, besides that part, but,
I mean, I don't mean,
It's worth
I mean
bringing it
the
up.
General Assembly, not necessarily our
Yeah.
particular legislators.
Okay. All right, so I think 16 is on consent, 17 is not, and now we're down to Legislative Review Committee. Chair Neesmith on the latest, we had a preview at the last meeting about this, but this is the latest food truck ordinance update.
That's right. You may recall at the last meeting, what we approved was the combining of a food truck permit with an itinerant merchant permit, which would allow the food trucks to operate without additional permit costs on private property, with permission, of course. So in our last meeting, we considered changing or expanding the locations and the nights for food trucks on public property. After some input from the police department, we decided that the locations that were asked for by some folks in the industry weren't really feasible because the sidewalks were too narrow, or that particular spot was already being used by the police department for more important purposes, or other purposes anyway. But we did decide to honor one of their requests, which was to expand the hours, which heretofore or now are on Thursday night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. That's around City Hall, and to add to that Friday night and Saturday night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. So that's what this particular ordinance is about. Looking forward, I believe that the mayor instructed us to take a look at the intersection between the food truck industry and home occupation licenses. In that if we could provide the ability for someone to establish a commissary in their home, then that's a great hurdle that they have and they could overcome in operating a food truck business. So I'm intending to move that forward in our.
Well, we'll see at the next LRC meeting what's on the agenda with that. But at this point in time, what is in front of us is going to be just allowing the Thursday location around City
Right,
Block,
that's
City
what
Hall
we're gonna vote
to
on.
move to Friday and Saturday.
That's right.
That's what this specific is.
Correct.
Okay. Stay tuned for more. Commissioner Hamby.
Sure. And I appreciate you bringing that up about the time extensions. And I just want to make it clear, I did read over the LRC agenda for this Thursday, and it looks like you're waiting on more information about the home occupancy, so it won't be on this agenda. Am I right in saying
We're
that?
going to tackle that.
Okay, but just not, you're just waiting,
Right.
you're not going to talk about it Thursday?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's what I'm just making clear.
And you might need to remind the mayor, because I'm not sure that she officially put that on
She
to
did.
the LRC. Is it on the coming up?
It's on their future items
Okay,
for
all right,
consideration.
perfect.
But,
Okay. You're doing so much reading.
I am.
You're ahead of me already. Okay, so can we put LRC's topic on consent, please? Yes, okay, that goes to consent, 18. 19, this would be one of the SPLOST 2011 projects, bus stop improvements. Everybody should have seen all the art in the packet, exciting stuff. I think I saw Commissioner Parker's hand up first.
Thank you.
And then we'll come over here to Hamby and Herod.
Thank you. I'm really excited about all the art proposals that came forward. They look really great. And want to thank everyone involved in the jury process for getting us those. And talking to some of them, though, I heard that they went through a blinded process of selecting them. And while we do have a majority of the project's proposals originating from Athens, I was wondering if in future projects we might be able to have it stated that which projects are produced by local artists as a way to perhaps inform the committee that's deciding upon them if they wanted to give greater weight towards a certain project based on the fact that it is produced by a local artist. Though I'm happy to support this going on the consent agenda, I just wanted to ask to see if that might be possible or something we could ask them to do in future.
Bill, is that legal to put, I mean, we might can learn what's legal for weighted things in this respect.
I want to research it a little bit, but I think a weighting based purely on location is probably okay to encourage local
But then
use.
we would have to define
Yeah, I
that
think
as
defining
well.
local might be a little bit difficult.
Because we went through that with one of our, some of our recent committee work was defining what's a local business, and then we would need to state the criteria to validate that, but
It was the opposite of art. It was septage.
yes, it was. But that would be a good item for a committee as well.
Okay.
To do as far as we look for. Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I sat on the Cultural Affairs Commission for the earliest years, and we did have some projects where, yeah, it was required that you either lived in Athens or in one of the surrounding counties. You know, one of the big concerns with these larger projects, you know, like a bus stop, there's a lot of skill and experience needed to pull off that fabrication of something that big with all the, you know, safety requirements and everything. So it's always been a concern that, you know, there isn't a huge pool of artists in Athens that can pull that off that have the experience. We're getting more of them. Some of them are moving back to town, which is exciting. So yeah, for big projects like this, we almost have to expand the pool. But one of the things that the new bus stop art program makes available is we're going to have some of these standard pre-manufactured bus stops, but with panels in the back that anybody can just design. You don't even have to be a professional artist. If you have a cool design, you could submit it, kind of like the panels on the parking deck. So that opens up the field for any locals to participate in our public art project.
I need to go back to my original list of hands that were up. I'm so sorry,
No, that's
Commissioner
right. No
Hamby.
worries.
You were
We'll just-
next, and Harrod, I had it right there. but
We'll
I
have a
got
chance to get a new
distracted.
parent pro tem soon enough, so that was a joke. If you can't handle it.
Okay, Commissioner Hamby.
I do, and I want to give a compliment to Butch McDuffie and our transit folks for I'm looking over the proposed art shelter locations. And I remember having a meeting about this, I think it was in government ops, and we just really wanted to focus on those corridors that we've done some studies on and ways to make them more aesthetically pleasing. And this certainly is going to be one way. And I just wanted to note here that Atlanta Highway, Lexington Road, and Prince Avenue are all well represented on the different types of shelters being utilized. So even Epsbridge Road has a new.
What about
has a new,
Okeechobee?
Do I know? I'm
And
sorry.
then there's Okeechobee. That's all right.
I thought I
That's not
saw
on the list.
something-
That's
I
all
thought
right.
I saw
5
something
Points
here.
is not on the list either, but this is a good list. Go ahead.
Some Millage Avenue ones are. Yeah. Yeah, Millage Avenue near the bypass down there.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
River Bend. So anyway, it's a good list. It looks like a lot of effort went into it to find the right spots for them.
Yep. Commissioner Hamby? I mean, Harrod? Sorry, that was Commissioner Hamby. Excuse me.
Thank you, Madam, whoever you are.
Somebody, yeah.
So I guess several things. I mean, on the issue of local artists, I mean, I think everybody behind the rail wants to support local artists. But I've sat on the selection committee for some of these, not this particular project, but for some other cultural affairs projects. And you always run into the issue of, as Commissioner Link said, do we have local artists that have the skills to do a certain particular job that we need them to do? And then you also, obviously, the more narrowly you define who you want to have bid on the project, that restricts what you're going to get. And sometimes something from a local person is really great, and sometimes something from somewhere else may be better. So I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. But I had two quick questions. So the first is, and maybe I'm just not understanding the report, and I'm glad to see this. It actually comes out of work that the Government Ops Committee did probably about a year or so ago now to look at the scoring list for where bus shelters go. But Mr. Manager, so in the attachment there, or in the report rather, there are a series of illustrations of different types of art bus shelters at the back of this item. It's unclear to me, maybe it's clear to everybody else. Are these, which of these is going in which roads? How do we know that? Is that in the report, or is this, is this all of the ones that were selected and they will just be chosen, not necessarily, I don't want to say at random because that's not going to be the case, but
Sure.
But how do we know what's going where?
Well, these shelters have not been assigned to a destination yet.
Okay, so these are just the winning designs.
That's right.
Okay. So just to pick one at random, attachment number 3, it could go on Atlanta Highway, it could go on Lexington, it could go somewhere else. That decision hasn't yet been made. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The second question I had is, in the facts and issues number 19, oh, no, not facts and issues, number 19, it's the history, where it talked about how in March of 2017, GDOT notified us that, or notified the Transit Department that there was some additional money available if we could come up with a matching money, and it says at that time we didn't have matching money for the local match. Did we subsequently come up with any local matching money, or did we just lose the opportunity for that additional money?
No, we got it.
We did, okay.
Yeah, that's why instead of $2.5 million, we've got $3 million.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I didn't see that listed, unless I didn't read it properly. I didn't see it listed in the history.
And if I might, and for the benefit of the audience that's watching, that's really the beauty of the matching funds from SPLOST, is
Yep.
that we can leverage that and get more money from the state. And the reason that we were able to take advantage of it is other communities don't have that match laying around.
Well, that's kind of where I was hoping that we would end up with the conversation. So,
Okay.
but it's not listed in the report here that we actually did come up with that money. At least if it is, I might have read over it. Okay.
Commissioner Dickerson, and then Commissioner Parker.
I was just going to piggyback on what Commissioner Hamby said. I appreciate that the funding is actually coming from SPLOST 2011, so that the funds that we've set aside for T-SPLOST on those corridors won't have to be used for that purpose. That frees up for other things we know we're going to need them for. So I really appreciate staff going after the grant and for the extra money that we're getting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Parker, back away.
Thank you. I just want to respond to some of the comments about local artistry. It's unclear to me, how do we expect local artists to gain the experience and the portfolios and to have the capital to devote to becoming artists of a caliber to be competitive in the market for projects like this here in Athens or in other places, unless our local government will support them. So even if we don't have the most inspiring designs out of the bunch, I think it's really important for us to help support our local artists and become competitive through giving them weighted consideration for projects like these. So I hope that we can get some feedback from the attorney about whether or not that is feasible. I also, in researching some of the artists that were under consideration, a majority of them were local, but I don't know how well they reflected other kinds of diversity in our community. And so when we're thinking about still having a blinded jury process, while also focusing on artists being local, I was wondering if there's other ways that we could also add weight to other categories such as race or ethnicity or LGBTQ or disabled folks, something like that.
Well, I would say in this case, the fact that federal funds are involved would make that both local, given preference to certain categories of folks would be problematic, but if it was local funds, certainly you could structure things like that.
Okay.
I have to respectfully disagree. If government funds are expended and weight is given for certain, preference is given to certain racial groups, sex, anything like that, those are the protected categories. And so that is not permissible to use government funds for that purpose.
Okay. So to add to that, so when we have resolutions like I think I saw with the GDOT funds that we were trying to get approval for earlier in the agenda, where we can say, pass a resolution saying we're going to do all that we can possible to take advantage of minority-owned enterprises, could we implement something like that for a process like this as well?
I would have to research that.
Okay. That'd be cool.
Okay.
Okay, so do we want to keep this off consent to continue the applaud to this project? Because we're all in favor of it, obviously, but consent?
Consent is good.
That's good? That's good?
Way
Okay.
to get them on the ground.
There we go. All right, item number 20, the sewer use ordinance revisions. This was part of our work session. Anybody need any more clarification on that? Can we put it on consent? Yes, excellent. 21, the big finally, on our agenda, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, also known as Athens in Motion. If you're like me, I have not gotten deep into the 50-page document that's in the agenda.
Would
But-
you like me to give you the quick version?
No, but if anybody has gotten far enough along, Mike, to have questions and need more clarification or input, I see Commissioner Harrod and Commissioner Link. Oh, hands are up all over. Let me get, okay. Commissioner Harrod, you're first.
Thank you. I just have a question or a comment. So I was looking through the different, I guess they're called menus for how roads with sidewalks and bicycles and cars can be designed. And I'm looking particularly at pages 288 and 289 of the PDF. And if I can zoom in a little bit. So for the urban menu, if I'm looking in the right place, there's a design where you have the road, the road, and then there's a sort of a protected sidewalk with trees. Well, not sidewalk, but there's a protected area with trees, and then there's bike lanes, and then there's sidewalk. But that is not an option for suburban areas, and I would like to see it be an option because I think that's a pretty good design.
Maybe we could get some clarification
Sure,
on
sure.
that.
I was just
as to
looking.
The
Well,
pros and
let-
cons, or is that?
Let me ask
ahead.
you, on 289, Andy, the suburban menu, and then if I've heard you correctly, and I'm just asking to clarify, look straight down and over to the right. That has a tree separating the bikes from the road.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. So I guess I was just looking at without getting too picky, on page 288,
Okay,
on the halfway down on the left, it says sidewalk level bike lane, and there's
Oh.
kind of a sidewalk, the bike lane, and then there's a sort of a orangey color with trees, and then there's the traffic
gotcha.
lanes, and then there's the same. That seems to me, and I'm not a design expert, that seems to me to be a little bit different from what you're looking at, which is called Bike Boulevard Neighborhood Street.
You're right. I was looking at something different. Thank you for clarifying.
So, and I'm not really sure what the difference between those two is. Maybe it's just that one has orange color and one has green, in which case that's fine. But I like that particular design because I think it's safer for people on bicycles. I think it's safer for people driving in cars. And I can imagine that there are many places in quote-unquote suburban parts of the community where that would work really well. And I would hate for it to just be only considered on the quote-unquote urban menu.
Okay.
Okay, I have Commissioner Link, then Commissioner Gertz, and then Hamby.
Yeah, I have a handful of things. First of all, this is exciting. It's exciting to have all this information in one package, and I would ask if we could get a printed copy of this, because there's a lot of cross-referencing that kind of needs to happen in deciphering the document. So I hope that we can all get that, an actual hard copy, so we can flip back and forth. And I want to note on page 4 of the document, on the chart, where it talks about implementation, there's a recommendation for a bike ped coordinator, a staff position, which I feel like we certainly would need to implement all these recommendations and to achieve this by 2040. But also a citizens advisory council, and that's something I've been advocating for years before this was even conceived of. I hope that we can get something like that appointed, and I'm hoping it's a group that can accurately reflect not only the geographic diversity of the community, but the cultural, sociological diversity of the community. A lot of times on these groups, you have, your hardcore cyclists, but really the people that may not be cyclists but might want to cycle, could offer some really important viewpoints when discussing plans and coming up with prioritizing some of these recommendations and then specific projects along the way. I'd really like to see, not necessarily even a citizen advisory council, but something more of a alternative transportation commission that not only weighs in on these projects, but weighs in on planning projects as well, and alternative transportation access to planning projects. And I also noticed that roundabouts do not appear on the menu anywhere. There's no menu that recommends, or at least I haven't seen it yet, this is a long document. There's no recommendation for how to incorporate bike facilities into roundabouts, and we're increasingly turning to roundabouts in our community. And I know there's some information out there saying it's hard and impossible to get bikes in roundabouts, but take a look at what the Dutch are doing. I went down a rabbit hole of information the past couple weeks about how the Dutch are addressing bike lanes or their shared use paths and getting around roundabouts. And it's really interesting. I would really like to see roundabouts be incorporated in here because we definitely are getting more and more roundabouts in our community, and we can't disqualify a road from bike access just because it has a roundabout.
You had referenced a page. Can you give me the page number, like in the packet, so that I know where you were
The implementation, it's the chart that says implement, I'm not looking at the packet, I'm looking
Okay.
at the online document.
Okay.
It's page 4 of the actual document.
Okay, of the
The
agenda,
chart-
of the agenda item? Okay.
Of the page 4 that's on the PDF,
Okay.
as the PDF is marked.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's a chart in
Okay.
the implementation section on the far right block. It talks about
Okay.
the citizens
I got as
advisory
far as the chart that showed the different.
I mean, I haven't gotten through
levels
this
of it,
all,
yes.
and that's why I really would like a hard copy so I can snuggle up to it
All
at
right.
night.
Commissioner Gertz.
Just thinking about the snuggling.
Snuggle up, snuggle up.
I'll say last time I was in Amsterdam, the Dutch had a lot going on. I wanted to bring up a couple of notes about sort of our current bike ped activities and how they may dovetail into this. Folks may recall that there was a package of pedestrian and safe routes to schools programming in our SPLOST 2011 program. And I just checked the kind of financial status of that today. And I think there's $2.4 million remaining in that program. You may remember, put together what we called a sidewalk gap plan that took care of many segments around town. I know some of those have been in the design phase, and then many of them have gone to bid and are actually seeing action on the ground. And so I'd just like to get clarity from staff, which of those sidewalk gap projects are going to happen with 2011 money, and is some of that 2011 money going to go into funding activities that are described in this plan? I just kind of want to know where where we cut the cord on our prior programming and where we move on to sort of this new plan. And I guess maybe a corollary question is, are there some of those sidewalk gap projects that were identified that we simply don't have the SPLOST 2011 funds for, that are just going to go into this new matrix?
Gotcha.
But because there was, I think there's a list of about 20 projects, and I think it was even evident a couple of years ago that some of those were going to be funded and some of them just were not going to receive 2011 funding. So just that transition from our current program to this future program, I'm interested in. And then I think probably like many of you, I haven't read word by word everything in this document. And one thing I'm interested in seeing just in moving forward around pedestrian activity is a program that would receive some dedicated funding to manage future small gaps, is what I would call them. So I'll give you a good example. There's a project currently underway in Commission District 9, my district. It's sort of an L-shaped multifamily project with frontage both on MLK and Ruth. In both directions, there's a gap of just a couple hundred feet in sidewalk. I guess what I would hope to get to as a government is that anytime new projects are going in, given that we don't have a sidewalk bank kind of program that comes from an impact fee, that there would be a way for the government to always say, okay, hey, private activity X is going in, and it's going to stop 50 or 80 or 100 feet short of an intersection where we've already got some sidewalk. How do we make up that difference to get some short-term gain for connectivity in the community? Now, maybe that's in this document, and I apologize if I just haven't come across it yet. So I'm curious about DPW's perspective on how that could be managed in conjunction with this. That said, I'm really excited, and I'm looking forward to some of these implementation activities
Yeah.
coming to pass.
It is exciting, a lot of hard work in it as well. Commissioner Dickerson, and then Hamby.
Great, thank you. So I just want to reiterate that I think it's important as we move forward with this plan, and I do want to say I commend all those who worked really long hours to pull this together. I did go through the report. I'll probably go through it a couple more times for our next meeting, but the Citizen Advisory Committee and our staff did a really good job, I think, with this document. But I do want to repeat what I said earlier, is I really think it's important that we have a comprehensive approach. I mean, we do have this plan, we have an intersection improvement plan, we have existing calendar year paving projects, et cetera. I think we need to make sure that we have everything on the table and we're looking at all these comprehensively in order to leverage, when we're in those areas, we should be doing all this work or trying to make that a priority of that work. And I don't know which one gets the higher priority, the paving projects, the intersection improvements, or a bike, that's something that will have to be, maybe Mayor and Commissioner will make that decision based on what staff suggests. But I do think it's important that some sort of that there be some sort of criteria for prioritizing those projects that may already have activity going on in that area, just for the fact of getting in, getting it all done, and getting out. So that's one thing. I guess the other thing is I noticed I have a road, a sidewalk gap that I know of in my district that is not on the list, and I'm just kind of curious. It's not on I don't think it's on the sidewalk list that the staff has either, and I just want to make sure that we don't miss any. This one is actually on Moores Grove Road. I know it's not listed in this plan, and like I said, I don't think it's on staff's list. Perhaps it's one of those that's in between the city limits of Winterville and Clarke County, those kind of things, but I do want to make sure we don't miss that, because I am aware of that, and that has been brought to my attention by a constituent. Two other things on page 75, page 7, I'm sorry, Manager.
Can you send me that segment of what you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
I will get that to you. On page 75, that would be, hang on, because I know this
Sorry,
is.
I'm on the agenda
I
item now,
know.
too, so I can get that.
Yeah,
75.
okay. So on page 63 of the Athens in Motion project that was given to us, but 75 of our report, and I went off the internet too, I didn't take it from the download.
63.
Table 4-5, it lists.
Page 75?
It's page 75 of the PDF.
Okay, that's what I need.
Okay. Sorry, I know we're different numbers here. It's under bicycle improvements, and it's table 4-5. It lists ID number 99 Cedar Shoals Drive, and did I get that right? 253 is it? I'm on the wrong, okay.
I'm on this one. I pulled it up, thanks.
Actually, hang on, that may not be the one. I'm sorry, it's on page 64, table 4-6. I had the wrong table, I'm sorry. So table 4-6 lists the ones that Athens in Motion recommends be paid for through T-Splost. And my concern is, or my question is, trying to understand what is behind suggesting an enhancement to I think it calls for buffered bike facilities on Cedar, or an upgrade for the bike facilities on Cedar Shoals Drive. I drive that road quite a bit, hardly ever see anybody using the bicycle lanes, but when I do see them, they're plenty wide. I mean, that was a 4-lane road converted to a 3-lane. So I'm trying to understand why that would be a recommendation from the Athens in Motion group to expend money on something that seems to be working pretty well, and unless there's something we don't know, it'd be good to understand the justification for that. So that's one question I have. And then on page 69, which is page 67 of the report, so the actual report page, it highlights Lexington Highway corridor improvements under table 4-10, and it highlights a buffered facility for bike lanes between Whit Davis and Morton Road. Well, what concerns me is that we have a project, GDOT has a project, an 8-mile project that begins at Whit Davis Road and goes all the way out to Smoky Road, that includes a 4-lane divided highway with a sidewalk built in, but no bike facilities. Again, here's another project that's going to be going on, and it's going on between now. They've already started buying right away, but they're going to take that 2-lane road starting at essentially Southeast Clarke Park and make it 4-lane for 8 miles, roughly. And that's the information I have anyway. That was information that was given to me like a year ago when I asked about it. So we need to try to coordinate with GDOT and maybe get opportunity for us, if we are looking for bike, I mean, God help us if we put bikes on that highway, but if we can look at a divided, if they're going to do some sort of a sidewalk, perhaps this is the opportunity to coordinate a bike path type situation and I believe the sidewalk's just going to go to Timber. I think that sidewalk was just going to Timber Ridge neighborhood, not all the way up to Robert Hardiman. There aren't a lot of people that typically walk between that neighborhood and Robert Hardiman. But again, we should be coordinating these activities if we've got a construction project in that area, whether it's us or GDOT. So I'd like to see us, make sure that we've done that. That's all.
Okay. And so, Mike, are you ready to answer all the questions since you've read all this?
Yeah, no, not really. I do
Go
have
ahead
some
with your
comments.
comments.
Sure. And I just wanted to comment on Commissioner Harrod's thing, and I seem to remember a local recent zoning issue that we talked about, and they needed to get a variance in order to build the trees, the sidewalk, and then, you remember that, y'all? They had a variance for the street, and then the trees, and then the sidewalk. So I don't know if it's in our ordinance that's, if it is, I mean, I'd kind of like to see us people not have to get a variance for that sort of thing if that's part of their design. So the second thing is, I like this plan, and I appreciate the work that's been put into it, and I particularly like the last few parts of it where it details the different prices for everything, because we're always asking, well, what does this beacon cost, or what does this crosswalk cost, and it's all in here, so you can look at it and see how much it costs for that. The one comment I would like to make, though, is on the facility inventories. I know they have the crosswalk treatments there, and I'm assuming we're not limited to these, and I say that because I've seen in some other towns, and I've seen some in Atlanta, where the crosswalks have an art component to it, where the crosswalks they have a treatment where it's an artist that's designed a crosswalk and in a unique sort of way. And I think that's important as we go through all this, because you know how it is. I mean, if you see the same thing over and over again, you might ignore it after a while. But if you see something different, it'll be there, and you might pay more attention to it. So for safety's sakes, it might be. I know how the engineers are thinking. They want everything consistent and the same, which I can understand that. But if there's some, explore what other towns have done as far as adding some interesting feature to it, that would be good and safe as well.
On the asphalt
Yeah,
version
on the
of the
asphalt,
crosswalk.
or I know several bike racks are done,
Yep.
and we've done that around town, but I don't think we've done crosswalk treatment in a sort of unique, visible way like that.
Okay. Commissioner Neesmith, he hasn't spoken on this topic yet, and then I'll get to you. Commissioner Neesmith, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did, thank you. I must admit, I have not read this entire document, and I'm just wondering about the scope in terms of crosswalks and making recommendations for new crosswalks. Does it do that? About recommending new crosswalks and places for them? Or is it sticking more to just these are the corridors that we should improve?
I don't want to misspeak. Let me follow up with you on that.
Yeah, and the reason I
To what
ask
degree
is
it
because
is.
I know of places on the west side where, us as automobile drivers don't go, but those who live in the area do, walking. And there are no crosswalks, and they're really out of my, realm of realization, but I'm getting calls. We need a crosswalk on Commerce Boulevard. There's lots of condominiums back there. Never talked about that. So I do have a work order, a work request that's been in there a while to see if we could get that on the menu, because it's, anyway, I'm using that as an example to be sure that we're not blocking out needed things by saying this is the list.
Okay. So we'll get feedback on that?
Yes, I don't think we're that specific. It's just a higher level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
But I'll confirm that.
Commissioner Link? Were you finished?
Yes.
Commissioner Link?
So we've referenced a couple other documents that are relevant to this and to the future implementation of it. I wonder if we could get a folder in our FTP site that has those documents along with this document, so we can have all this stuff in one place, so as projects come forward, we can kind of cross-check and make these decisions ahead of time, or at least see what's coming, so we can, know to implement these bike ped infrastructure when we have the opportunity.
So I did get far enough in reading to see the different documents that the committee studied that we already have. Is that the list you want on the FTP site, so you have it all there?
That's what I'm thinking, if we could have,
Do you see
I
the
know that we
page?
probably have a lot of them scattered around our own desktops, but
It's not too far into it that I saw that list, and I thought it
Yeah.
was an impressive list of the studying they did on those things.
yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. If we
Okay,
can
so-
have easy access to that whole
Okay.
pile of
So-
them, the
so
sidewalk list, and
I
the
think,
pavement
yeah, so he'll
maintenance.
find the list that talks about those documents, we'll get them on the FTP site, so we have them all in one place, and we don't have to all ask Jean to keep sending them out. We could do it all at one time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Did I see another hand? No? Okay. All right, we are down to item number 22, that is just title only at this point, so I guess we'll leave it there and see more, or not?
I would
Commissioner
like to
Dickerson.
address that to some extent. We did have a citizen come forward tonight, so I would like to share some of what's happened in the last 5 days. First and foremost, I mean, this is an item that I have received the most comment on. I haven't, since I've been a commissioner for almost 4 years, that I've received 15 emails and 2 phone calls in just 5 days, and all of them were against the project. And I say that just to let everybody know that it's not being as well received. And some of it is what we've talked about already, which I'll share a little bit about. But I think what we're basically seeing is similar to what happened with the Chase Street lane reconfiguration project, and that is those who are being impacted are not necessarily people who live there, and that's why I'm speaking and not Commissioner Harrod at this point. The people who live in my district who don't have an option to get on their bike and go to the grocery store for their 5 kids or go to school, go to work or whatever, they have to get in their car and drive. And so they're driving through this area. And they're dependent upon their automobiles. And so, I'm certainly not, I've said it several times, I'm not against the bike lane. I just don't think this particular application is the best. And what I want to do is share with you guys, remind y'all something that was written by Tyler Dewey, who addressed us about the Chase Street project last year about this time. And what I'm going to do is ask you that when I say Chase, you think Barnett Shoals. Chase was not a bike project. Athens-Clarke County's road diet policy does not evaluate the street's suitability or need for bike lanes. These are not bike projects. There's no multimodal balancing. Basically, we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. One size does not fit all, and it should be appropriate what we put in there. And what Commissioner Harrod mentioned tonight, I think, is a great example. What works in one area may or may not work in another. So some of these models that we're looking at for suburban versus urban settings, we need to try to think about what might work best. In this case, there was a model that really should be listed as suburban that wasn't. We have to use a complete streets framework to measure how these streets work for all. Again, quoting Mr. Dewey, it looks this loss of service that we use to grade, traffic looks strictly at motor vehicle. It doesn't consider other users. In opposite of what happened with Chase Street, their configuration worked either way. Unlike that, ours actually does reduce the level of service. We see a level of service change. And what's interesting is in Athens in Motion actually lists the Barnett Shoals segment that we're talking about as a level of comfort 4. Which means it's not comfortable for bike traffic, it's only suitable for advanced cyclists, and it's characterized by high speeds. I do think that, complete streets policy would reduce the likelihood of doing this. We did this with Baxter, Doherty, Chase. Here we are at Barnett Shoals, and, it's unfortunate that, we've had to spend any money on it to show how it maybe isn't the best. But, I think, and I don't want to speak on Commissioner Harrod's behalf, but I think we felt like we had to have some data, and that's why we moved forward with doing this pilot project. And I'm all for giving it a little bit more time. The first 5 days have not been pleasant for me because my inbox has gotten inundated as well as my getting calls and meeting people on about this. But one of the things I think is interesting, and I'm going to quote exactly what Tyler Dewey said because I think it's important. Ultimately, this dilemma reveals the limitations of our existing complete streets policy. Complete streets aim to make our streets safer for all users. If a street becomes safe for people on a bike by making it more dangerous for people in cars, it's an incomplete street. If a street can only stay safe for people in cars by shifting all the risk to people on foot and on bike, it is an incomplete street. Putting the safety of one group against the safety of another is not a solution. Simply suggesting people avoid the corridor altogether is not a solution. I've seen that on Nextdoor. A lot of people say, I'm just not going to run that road anymore. Nor is making the street so intimidating that people on bikes simply will avoid it. We can do better, and I agree. I think we can do better. And one of the things that, like I said, I want to give it more time, but I do intend to ask the mayor to look into doing a traffic impact analysis, as was done very shortly after she began getting phone calls on the Chase Street project. And while I understand that doesn't cover, does a TIA, a traffic impact analysis, only looks at cars, I think ultimately what we're going to be looking at is probably needing to do a comprehensive corridor study, as was done on Chase Street, in order to really look at that corridor as a whole and not just trying to, like I said, put a square peg in a round hole. So, thank you.
Okay. All right. We're ready to move on to receive staff reports on recommendations from the Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission. We don't have public hearing at this time, but on our voting meeting Tuesday, October 2nd, we will have time for public input at that point. Brad, you ready? Almost. Oh, was I supposed to do something up there?
Screen down.
Yeah. You did.
Gene,
Gene did.
you know Gene's in control of everything, right?
He is.
Hold on.
Luckily.
I'm going to have to sign back out and sign in. Just trying to do updates.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Ready?
Yes, we are.
Since you were waiting on me.
Yeah,
All
sorry.
right, got two for you this evening. First is a straight rezoning request at 1989 Jimmy Daniel Road from Commercial General to RM1. Request to rezone just a small portion of a parcel currently zoned Commercial General to the RM1 designation, which allows then for ground floor residential development. It would be the same zoning as the balance of the parcel, which is currently split zone, compatible with our comp plan, no binding plans. This one will make a little more sense when I show it to you. The overall tract, both the area in red, the area just kind of outside the red and around to the left and lower, was originally all done as open space for the larger Ridge Point development. When this development started back in the early 2000s, we allowed single-family residential as a permitted use in Commercial General. We did not allow it, we would allow it in the multifamily too, but the overall development called for single-family up in the area that you see that has currently been roads installed and lots platted. The lower southern portion was always intended to be multifamily. What we have now, and it is going through our permitting process, is a fairly large 55 and over community. This is a by right one that would not have to come to you for any type of zoning approval. It is being done as their attached villa type units that are condos. The little area you see in yellow is the remaining area that when we changed the ordinance about 10 years ago in CG and stopped allowing single families of permitted use, it was just a little remnant that was left out. And so
They're simply asking to change that portion to RM1 to reflect the rest of it. There's a little closer view of that's really all this is about, is changing that area from CG to RM1, thereby then allowing those units to be done as condominium by right. And a little more on just an aerial. This is an older aerial. There's been more development in there since this was taken. You see this change there from the red up in the corner to the RM1. And the recommendation from Planning Commission was to approve for the following reasons. It was unanimous vote.
All right, this is in Commissioner Neesmith's district?
Yes, ma'am. Looks like a good idea.
Okay. And can we go back to the picture with, that was the photo, aerial photo? That's Sam's Club, right, up at the right, the white
Correct.
roof?
Correct.
Am I oriented correctly?
That is correct.
Yes, that is correct.
All right. That's all I needed to clarify.
Okay.
Does anybody else need any information on this? Okay.
Second
Item number 24.
Yes, ma'am.
District
1070
1.
and 1085 Belmont Road. This is a special use request. This is the first of the special uses coming out of the text amendment that this body approved back in August, allowing these rural event facilities to be considered in our AR zoning district under the special use provisions. It's a 5-acre portion of a much larger overall tract of property that would include, there's an existing barn facility on the property. They would request to build an additional pavilion, and I've got a picture of what it would look like. As with any special use, if approved, the plans in the report become binding for the use. Here is the overall tract, and I will not have my arrow, but the area in question is that very top left corner. You see the barn in the very top left corner of the property, and then the parking area will be out in front of the residential structure on the property. There's the site plan. Now, the parking that you see there is for illustrative purposes only, just demonstrating how many cars they could get in. Under this new rural events facility, it would be typical fairground-type parking where you pull in onto a grassed area. There would be a gravel driveway to get you onto the property, but then you would park much like you would at other kind of rural events where it's simply just parking on grass. And there you see a kind of a zoomed-in version. That area right out in front of the house you see in the middle of the picture would be the parking area during the times of these events. The silver roofed structure to the north of the driveway is the barn, and the pavilion structure would go just to the right of it if approved. That's the existing barn. This is kind of the area that would be the parking area from the main entrance. Just a few views out along the corridor. The proposed pavilion that would go to the right of the barn if approved. Planning Commission recommendation is for approval. This special use, they're calling for 20 to 30 events a year, 50 to 150 people, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. with music stopped at 10 p.m. and everybody gone by 11. And so the Planning Commission is recommending to you consideration of approval with conditions. You see some of the green revisions there. Coming out of the Planning Commission meeting, the applicants revised their site plan to address some of those conditions, so they will not all appear in your ordinance when you receive it for your October voting meeting. But the recommendation from Planning Commission is to approve.
Okay. Any questions? Commissioner Dickerson, do you have anything to share?
Just that, I guess before they realized that they couldn't be doing this, I attended a wedding out there, and it's a very nice, very nice facility. And I'm glad that we were able to, take this in as a consideration. I do think what's neat about it is that it does preserve the rural aspects of the property. It is set up for others in this community to enjoy more rural aspect of our community, but also provide a business opportunity for those people. So I think it's great. Thank you.
All right. Is that everything?
That is all I have.
All right, then that wraps up the agenda meeting, and we will now take a small break and then enter into executive session.